It is December 1st, 2024, and as we continue to watch violence soaring in northwestern Syria as cities like Aleppo are targeted by the rebranded version of Al Qaeda and a number of other extremist groups there on the ground, I wanted to take a moment today to take a step back and to look at how we got to this point, right? How US foreign policy got us to the current violence that we are seeing in Syria right now, and the fact that I do believe it is no coincidence that all of this is happening under the last 2 months of the Biden administration. So I discussed all of that in this week's edition of Sanctioned, which was just released for my paid subscribers earlier today. I wanted to give a preview here on the free feed, and if you're interested in watching the full version, you could check it out now, available for paid subscribers on my page on Substack. That's Rachel Blevins .substack.com. Also available for my paid subscribers over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rachel Blevins. As always, for those of you who are signing up as paid subscribers, you are making my work possible and ensuring that it continues. Thank you so much to all of you for your support. And let's get into a preview of this week's episode of Sanctioned. Let's start out with the state of relations between the US and Syria over the last few decades. Now, to sum it up, there have been tensions between the two countries for years now, in large part due to the creation of Israel back in 1948, the illegal Israeli occupation of the Syrian Golan Heights that began in 1967, and just general US meddling in the region that really has never stopped. Hafez al-Assad was the president of Syria from 1971 until 2000. And it's really fascinating to read about how US presidents struggled to deal with him, mainly because he refused to bend to their will. A 2017 article from The New Yorker titled "Assad Family, Nemesis of 9 US Presidents" noted that when Bill Clinton and Assad met in Geneva back in March of 2000, the Syrian president spent much of the session lecturing the younger US president about the history of Syria's border with Israel and reiterating his demand for the return of the entire Golan Heights as a condition for peace. Just a few months later, Assad would die from a heart attack, and his son, Bashar al-Assad, would become the next and current president of Syria in July of 2000. And tensions between the US and Syria would only continue to soar as Washington would further increase its meddling in the Middle East with the invasion of Iraq in 2003. To say that George W. Bush was not Assad's biggest fan would be an understatement, as he remarked during an interview in 2013 that, quote, "I was not a fan of Mr. Assad. He's an ally of Iran and he's mad mischief." Of course, those feelings from Bush were very clear when he was in office, as he said during a White House press conference back in 2007. Remember when presidents actually had press conferences? Yeah, it seems like a long time ago in a completely different world. But Bush said at the time that his patience with Assad had run out. Bush went on to say, quote, "My patience ran out on President Assad a long time ago. The reason why is because he houses Hamas, he facilitates Hezbollah, suiciders go from his country into Iraq, and he destabilizes Lebanon." Now, speaking of those tensions, the US had withdrawn its ambassador from Syria back in 2005 following the assassination of the former Lebanese prime minister that the US largely blamed on Syria. And during that 2007 interview, Bush said that Syria needs to stay out of Lebanon, which, can we just take a moment to talk about the hypocrisy there? I mean, Syria and Lebanon in the exact same region. These two countries are neighbors. And yet the US is coming over here talking about what Syria needs to do, how it needs to mind its own business in its own backyard. As if, I mean, can you imagine if Russia or China came to the US and said that the US needed to stop, that they needed to stay out of Mexico or Canada? Oh, the US would hear none of it. Okay, so things didn't go well between Bush and Assad, but what about Obama? Well, when we had Obama's inauguration in 2009, shortly after that, Bashar al Assad actually gave a very rare interview to The Guardian in which he said that the US should send an ambassador to Damascus soon to make good on Obama's offer to engage in dialogue with countries that the Bush administration had shunned. And so then Senator John Kerry, who was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, went to Damascus with his wife in 2009, and they dined with Assad and his wife. It was one of multiple meetings between the two men, and Kerry said at the time that, quote, Syria is an essential player in bringing peace and stability to the region. However, by 2013, Kerry had drastically changed his tune. He was openly referring to Assad as a two-bit dictator, and he called on Obama to authorize the use of force in Syria, claiming that this was a Munich moment in reference to the 1938 Munich Agreement with Hitler before World War II. So, what changed in those 4 years? Well, the reality is that it wasn't just John Kerry. I mean, for one, the Obama who campaigned in 2008 was a very different Obama from the one that we got in the White House. I mean, this was the guy who promised to end the war in Afghanistan, to close the US military prison on Guantanamo Bay. And then he gets into office and he goes on to illegally bomb 7 countries while at the same time setting new records for the number of bombs he could drop in a single year. But then the question becomes, was there really that much change? Because I believe at the end of the day, politicians are politicians. They will say what they need to say in order to get into office. And for someone like Obama and everyone around him, they knew that the Arab Spring was coming. And I truly believe that they were trying to just kind of see what they could get out of Assad for as long as he was willing to have these meetings, to have any kind of talks. They were trying to see what they could get from him because they knew that the Arab Spring was coming. And they were the ones making it happen. Although they do like to act as if the violent anti-government protests that swept across Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, and Bahrain just kind of came out of nowhere. But even the New York Times was admitting back in 2011 that as American officials and others look back at the uprisings of the Arab Spring, they are seeing that the United States democracy-building campaigns played a bigger role in fomenting protest than was previously known, with key leaders of the movements having been trained by the Americans in campaigning, organizing through new media tools, and monitoring elections. So all of this had been in the works for quite a while, and I do believe that Obama knew that, even as he went to Cairo in the first year that he was in office back in 2009, and he called for a new beginning between the United States and Muslims around the world, one based on mutual interest and mutual respect. He knew that the world had just endured 8 years of the Bush administration and its so-called war on terror. Obama was presenting himself as an alternative, saying, here is a new beginning, right? I am going to be different. But he meant none of that. And even as he went on to target the exact same regions of the world that George W. Bush had just targeted, he did it all with Joe Biden, who had already spent a lifetime in Washington, by his side. In August of 2011, Obama announced sanctions against the entire Syrian government and called for Assad to step down. And in December of 2011, Biden was joining Obama in their new slogan, Assad must go. But Assad didn't go. And it did not matter what the US threw at him, from mass protests to media propaganda to claims of chemical attacks carried out by the government to mass sanctions targeting the country. Assad stayed in power. He's still in power to this day. And that is even as the CIA launched Operation Timber Sycamore, which, can we just take a moment to talk about how ridiculous that name is? They launched that operation targeting the Syrian government, and it's believed to have been kicked off around 2012. If you want to watch that full episode of Sanction, you can catch it now as a paid subscriber over on my page on Substack. That's rachelblevins.substack.com, as well as on my page on Patreon. That's patreon.com/rachelblevins. As always, thank y'all so much for all of your support, and I'll see you next time.